hopping into the topics though, it is the month of Halloween. This podcast will post a day before Halloween, and I wanted to have a Halloween type topic to talk about, and we kind of brainstormed, and I want to talk about our favorite horror games. And it could be, indie games, it could be older games, whatever you like. I'll start off. So my favorite horror game is Dead Space. Thinking about it, I was never a huge Resident Evil guy. That could obviously be on the list for some people. I think Bioshock could technically be considered a horror game in some aspects because the environment and that kind of stuff is so rich and so dark and so mysterious and so unnerving. I would say it's a close second for me. But Dead Space just gets the it does jump scares well where they don't seem very cheap. And I just think space horror is one of my favorite types of horror. Because a lot of horror is the fear of the unknown, right? And what do we know almost the least about in comparison to a lot of other things is space and aliens and other organisms and stuff like that. So anything that has to do with space horror, I'm super into. Harkening back to even Alien, I would say Dead Space is easily my favorite horror game. Like I said, Bioshock would be a close two. I think as far as newer age horror games or experiences, Outlast. I was going to say Outlast. Have you guys have played Outlast, right, or at least seen it?
I think I know what it is.
Yeah, Outlast is really interesting because it's first person perspective, and the graphics aren't super great, but it does a really good job at building horror. It does a really good job introducing you to characters that you don't know what the heck they are, but you know to run away from them. And I think that's a really good aspect of horror games of let people figure out what they're running from, but at least introduce them to them in some capacity. Doesn't have to be direct, but in some way kind of introduce them to the threat. A lot of times, horror games that you never see the enemy are some of the most horrific or scary because it's the fear of the unknown, like we talked about. I don't want to go on too long, but the other horror game that was kind of recent in the last couple of years was Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Are you too familiar with that game?
Yeah.
Huge hit on PC. I am. Huge hit on PC. It's one of the horror games that kind of it wasn't the first one to ever do this, but over the last 6-ish years or so, PC horror games have introduced the mechanic of not being able to fight back and figuring out creative ways to deal with the problem at hand. And I think Amnesia was the first to nail that. The aesthetic, the audio in that game, it's just so well done. It captures horror in a way that very rarely do you even see what you're running from, if at all. And it's all about like hiding and making use of space and listening to audio cues and stuff like that. But the world building in that game is so good for a game that probably didn't have a huge budget. And I'm always interested in people making something really great from not a lot of resources. And I think the people who made Amnesia: The Dark Descent, they actually even made a sequel, did that. Like, they made a great horror game. And I think horror is one of the genres that you don't need a big budget for because it is the fear of the unknown. You can play with people, not actually ever make an asset for the monster, but build up the tension through audio and other cues to have a monster in the game without having the monster. So I think horror is a very interesting genre, and I think it's starting to come back into the fold with Resident Evil 7 and the like, and Outlast sequel, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So what about you guys? What are your favorite horror experiences?
You took the words right out of my mouth. For me, it's far and away Dead Space 1 and 2. And like you mentioned, all the horror elements are just superbly done, and being in space adds a little bit to that unknown. But in addition to all that, it's a good game on its own right when you don't
without
even
being
consider
a horror
the horror
game.
element.
Yeah,
exactly. Like,
it's a very good
the enemies are really varied and cool, and the mechanic of cutting off the limbs to kill them is different and exciting, and all the weapons are really unique and creative too. Like, that's a pretty good game without even being a horror game.
Even the HUD was very inventive of having the health bar on the back and stuff like that. Yeah,
that was really cool. Yeah. So that's easily my number one. Resident Evil 4 was really good, especially playing on the Wii, just because the controls were, janky and slow, but that actually added a lot to the experience, especially when it was the Wii. So just motion controls in general were like cool and new, and you didn't mind dealing with some of the jankiness around it at that time. If I tried it today on the Wii, I'd probably throw it through a fucking window, but like I wanted to do with Skyward Sword. But anyway, so Resident Evil 4 was good too. I never got to the Evil Within, really wanted to. Maybe sometime. Also, Dying Light was really fun. Maybe a little less of a horror, definitely less of a horror game than Dead Space, but still had some horror elements. And obviously you're killing zombies, but more so the nighttime stuff.
Yeah, didn't that game have an emphasis on that actually becomes more of a horror experience during the night because you are so underpowered in comparison, right? So it's a light zombie game during the day, but it actually feels more as if it's a horror experience during the night.
Yeah, so things get tense during the night. Yeah, you're much underpowered. The zombies are way stronger and they're way faster. And there's different kinds that'll chase you like relentlessly. And you can climb and do parkour and all that cool stuff. So that makes it fun. But yeah, it's super tense in that game when you're out at night. It's cool.
What's your favorite horror game, Jordan?
So, once again, you kind of also took the words out of my mouth. I definitely think Bioshock is a horror game. It has enough horror elements, I should say. And I definitely think that's my favorite horror game. I think the scariest game I've ever played is Amnesia Dark Descent.
That game is scary as hell.
Yeah, that game is just messed up all over the place. And then Dead Space is way up there too as well. And Dead Space and Bioshock are just two of my favorite games of all time, period. But
why don't we have another Dead Space?
Oh, it's no Dead Space 4, no Skate 4 at E3 this year, you know. You done fucked up, EA.
You don't know who I am, but you will.
You don't know. So, yeah, my favorite is Bioshock. I think it's really underrated horror in a way. People don't talk about it usually as a horror game. They might discuss whether it is or not, but I just think the horror in that game, it's the only video game that's ever made me jump, and I mean, like, physically jump out of my seat. There was a splicer that was teleporting in this, like, crazy room that, you know, was just specially made for him. And he, like, teleports right behind me, and I turn around, and he's right there in my face, and I just, like, freaked the hell out. So there was that scare, and then just the creepiness of the game is overt, and I definitely think horror is a good way to describe it. So Bioshock takes the cake, and definitely shouts out to Amnesia and Dead Space, and let's see.
That kind of tells you there's not much in this genre.
There's definitely not enough. I'm reaching here.
It's not a horror game by any means, but there is a point in that game is one of the creepiest experiences ever, especially as a kid, is in Pokemon Red and Blue when you go and you find out that there's this ghost that's haunting the cemetery, and you have to kind of like soothe the mother of soothe the mother's soul, and help the baby Cubone, and that was weird, man. Because even when you enter that city, the music is so different than the rest of the game. It's like very somber and creepy, and you're like, "What's going on here?" And then you find out that this Cubone's mom died, and then you read the Pokédex for the Cubone, not knowing anything about this Pokemon, and finding out that it wears the skull of its dead mother. The skull
of its mother, yeah.
Which is insane, yeah. So, I think that's crazy. I do think I hope we come across a lot more horror games in the future. Like I said, we have the Outlast sequel. We have Resident Evil, which seems like it's returning to the horror form. Hopefully a new Dead Space. Yeah, it's weird. Death Stranding has some weird, like, slight horror-y elements with...
oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Also, another game that is horror-inspired, but it isn't a scary game, is Dead by Daylight, which is the huge PC multiplayer game where one person plays as a killer, 3 people are trying to survive, or 4 people. That's cool, too, because it uses killers and famous tropes from horror movies of the past, so I think that's really cool. I think that's it for our horror talk. I don't think we have anything else. We're kind of all on the bandwagon of Bioshock and Dead Space.
Oh, yeah.